Since you already have a strong building foundation under your belt, now it's time to teach you the shortcuts and the navigation tips that can really take your building to the next level. When I talk about shortcuts and navigation, I'm talking about things like efficient methods for adding steps to the canvas, how to make your logic more digestible and documented across your flows, things like working with multiple steps at once, and leveraging drafts to build in a safer, more repeatable manner. Now, we'll start this video with the simpler basics that you absolutely must know, and we'll get more and more advanced as we go throughout this lesson. Let's get into it. First, let's talk about the canvas. As you've probably already discovered, we can zoom in and out in a few different ways, the most intuitive being to just zoom in and out using your trackpad. You also can use the buttons on the right-hand side to zoom in and out on specific steps, or you can hold down the Control key and then zoom up and down to zoom in and out. Now, since it is an infinite canvas, it's easy to wind up in the wilderness of the canvas where you're not exactly sure where the closest group of steps are. A couple handy tips here. If you click the F key, that is going to put all of your steps into the frame, and that is the same action that happens when we click this frame button in the bottom right. Another handy way to quickly understand where steps are laid out on the canvas is to click this mini map button, which will put all of the steps on the canvas into frame. Now let's talk at a step level. If I click a step, that will select it, and then I have a couple ways to actually open that step. If I hit spacebar, that will automatically open the step, and then I can hit escape to close it. You can also double click on a step to open it as well. Now, while I have this step selected, let's talk about a couple other options I have here. As you've probably learned, hitting the delete key is going to delete a step and keep the downstream steps connected. But let's say I did that accidentally. Well, the same way you can undo in a text editor, I can hit Command Z to undo an action in Parabola, and we can hit Command Y to redo an action in Parabola. When you have a step selected, you can also duplicate a step either by hitting the duplicate button in the toolbar or by clicking the D button on your keyboard to duplicate a step. This works both when you're duplicating a single step, but also when you're duplicating multiple steps at once. Speaking of multi-step actions, as you just saw, if you hold down Shift, you can select multiple steps at once, or similar to working on your desktop and selecting multiple files, if you hold down the Shift key, you can select multiple steps, and then if you right-click, you can get a menu of some different actions here, such as duplicating the objects, deleting them, or my favorite, adding multiple steps to a card at once. Another useful shortcut is the ability to copy and paste steps across different flows. Now, if I select, let's say, this CSV file step, and I hit Command C, similar to copying text, you'll see that this has been copied to our clipboard, and what's actually been generated here, if I paste, is going to be a text string that you can see here. This text string represents the steps that we just copied. Now you can see me in a brand new flow. I'm going to go ahead and hit Command V, the same way we'd copy text, and now we can see our steps were directly landing in the canvas. If you have one of those strings that we were looking at earlier, one of these values that start with Parabola, you can send this to a teammate, they can paste it into a flow, and get the same set of steps that you were just working with in your flow. When you're building your flow and working with steps, there might also be situations where you need to disconnect and reconnect arrows to move steps around in your flow. To disconnect arrows, we can grab an arrow head and drag it and drop it off of a flow to disconnect. And to reconnect, we can grab an arrow head coming out of one step and plug it into another. This even works when we have multiple steps already connected. We can always grab an extra arrow from a step and connect it into any other steps that we'd like downstream. You'll also notice that when you're dragging a step from the search bar onto the canvas, you can drop it directly onto a drop target, which will automatically connect the arrows for you and drop the step right into the chain. As you add steps and cards, flows occasionally can start to look a little bit messy if you have steps and cards all over the place. If you get into this situation and you want your flow to look a little bit nicer, really easy to do by clicking this auto arrange button in the bottom right. And finally, the last shortcut you should know is clicking the letter S is going to automatically open the search bar for you so you can search for specific steps and drag them onto the canvas. Now that you know the shortcuts, let's talk about the paradigm of live versus draft. Now, when you're building a flow in Parabola, by default, you are editing the live version of your flow. When this runs, it's running this actual workflow, so you don't really need to think much about what version am I currently working on, because you're basically always working in your live flow, unless you make a conscious decision to start working in a draft. Let's say I want this flow to keep running on a schedule, but I want to start working on some improvements. You might come in here, click this down arrow here, and say, let's create a new draft. This is going to duplicate the live version of your flow, and then give you a safe version of this flow that you can edit while the live version continues to run successfully. This is useful in situations where you have a flow that is running on an automated schedule, whether that is every day on the hour or every time you receive an email, and you want to make bigger changes often to that flow without disrupting the current scheduled runs for that flow. Whenever you're done making updates, you can just hit this Publish Draft button in the top right, and this will replace your existing live flow with this new version that you just created. That covers the key navigation and shortcut tips that you need to know, and I'll also link a doc below that covers all of our keyboard shortcuts in case you'd like to see the full list or see new ones as they're released. Now that you have that down, next up we'll cover the ins and outs of parabola tables.